that report is discussed with members with the BEC. They put the findings. Probity team comes, we put these 12 findings to you as the BEC. Do you have evidence to conclusively disagree with this, or do you accept these findings? In this instance, the findings were accepted, and that's what we're raising. And maybe the wording wasn't correct, but that's what we're indicating, that the findings stand, the findings were not cured, this 10 days irregular must be cancelled.
Is your use of the word consensus, saying there was no consensus, a misnomer perhaps? Because I'm really questioning the principle of it, the principle that you're suggesting, in fact you say so in so many words, that your procurement process requires that there must be consensus between Probity and BEC, and absent that, at least insofar as I've followed you, absent consensus, that could be a basis, or in fact is a basis, to cancel a tender. I have a problem with that as a matter of, maybe let me say even as a matter of law, but as a matter of supply chain management principles and policy.
Commissioner, the process does not require that. Maybe it's a word I used. The SC was asking me about alignment, about material irregularities, in trying to explain that maybe that's not a suitable word, but that's not required in terms of the city supply chain management policy, and that's not what I meant.
Your resolution says that your decision to cancel was due to material irregularity as indicated below. And there are 3 bullet points which provide the indication. The first says that during the meeting between the BEC and Probity teams on 26 August, it became apparent that there were multiple interpretations of the specifications, particularly the pricing schedule, which was issued as an addendum. In regard to the interpretations of the addendum, it stipulated that the pricing schedule must be completed in full brackets, no blank spaces. The BEC interpretation is the pricing schedule need not to have blank spaces. According to Probity team, the blank spaces must be completed with numerical figures. So there is a dispute as to what the requirements are between BEC and Probity. Probity says you've got to fill in a 0 when your pricing on a certain matter is 0. BEC says provided you don't leave blank spaces, for instance by just drawing a line through the space where you have nothing to price, that's compliant. There's that difference between the two. You see that?
I see that.
And is that what was being referred to there?
As additional findings that were not clearly articulated in the Probity report, these were additional measures that we were isolating as the BAC.
That's not what the resolution says at all. What the resolution says doesn't refer to the Probity report. It refers as forming the primary basis. It says the tender be cancelled due to material irregularity as indicated below. And then this is the first one. It doesn't say be cancelled due to material irregularity as set out in the Probity report and in addition as indicated below.
So I'm trying to clarify that there was no need to say that it was already accepted. The Probity report was not disputed. The Probity report was already accepted by the BEC included. And in actual fact, the report when it came to BAC, it came with an acceptance of the findings and an acknowledgement by BEC of the shortcomings that were there. When it comes to BAC, it does not come with a recommendation, SC. The BEC report already come to BAC having acknowledged the shortcomings that were agreed upon, that were presented to them by Probity. BAC, through the discussions, notes that there are additional issues that we've captured on page 429 and at the top of 430 that need to be emphasized on. Add those. It already came to BAC as a cancellation. So BAC did not change the decision of BEC. It came to BAC, agreed that it must be cancelled because those matters can't be cured.
That's not what your resolution says at all. Let's look at what your resolution says. We've dealt with the first material irregularity or alleged material irregularity identified in the resolution. Can I just look at this? Why was this an irreparable problem? One of the interpretations was going to be right, the other one was going to be wrong. Why couldn't the BAC take a decision on which the right one was and then act accordingly?
We did take a decision, the right one was that of probity.
Okay, and so then you can cure. You can disqualify the people who should have been disqualified according to probity, and you can mark the rest.
However, there are two findings that were raised that are uncurable. It would be a fruitless exercise referring a team back to go and cure matters in isolation, where other matters can't be cured. So even if BAC took a decision to refer this back, cure these irregularities, it would have came back and been cancelled in any case as a result of findings number 1 and 2. It would have been a time waster.
Well, I'm confining myself to what the resolution actually says, as opposed to what you'd like us to believe the resolution meant. The first reason for cancelling is a difference in interpretation between BEC and BAC, BEC and probity. You have confirmed that BAC accepted that probity was right. Can you confirm that?
I can confirm that.
Now, if just looking at this in isolation, not looking at anything else, if probity was right, this was a curable problem, looking at it in isolation. You're nodding your head. Can I get confirmation that this is correct?
No, I'm listening. Apologies. I think it's a bad habit that I have when I listen and nod my head. Apologies.
So if probity was right and if BAC agreed that probity was right, this was a curable problem. You could disqualify the people who probity said should have been disqualified, and you could have marked the rest.
The answer is yes. Can I please explain further?
I'm taking them each in isolation. You can explain at the end.
Please allow me to do that. I need to state this point. It's extremely important for me. So SC, when you are doing supply chain management processes, you can't look at matters in isolation of each other. So I just wanted to give that overview that indeed you are correct. This is a matter that could have been cured. However, procurement process is the entire picture. It's not certain aspects. That's why we have administrative, mandatory, and evaluation-related criteria. That if an individual is compliant in one aspect, we can't just look at that aspect in isolation of the entire picture. So with this instance, with all due respect, we had to look at the entire picture, and the entire picture included the uncurable matters as raised by probity team.
Yeah, we'll get to the entire picture at the end. For now, I want to focus on each of the individual reasons given by the BAC in its resolution. We've dealt with the first one. You've accepted the first one was curable. Let's look at the second one. The specifications stipulate that some areas do not require armed guards, whereas the mandatory requirement dictate that bidders who do not submit firearm licenses as part of their bid would be disqualified. Therefore, it is disadvantaging those who do not have firearm licenses. So that was your second reason. Now, this is something that presumably should have been picked up in the bid specification committee a year previously. What's your comment on that?
My comment on that, SE, is that I can't say it could have been picked up at that point because that BSC committee is made up of a multitude of individuals, specialists as well, including TMPD. So I'm not aware of the reason behind them not including that at that point in time. However, I just want to add that whilst we are looking at these matters individually, I agree with you. However, these are not the only reasons that led to this cancellation.
You're going to have the opportunity to explain that at the end, but I now want to confine myself to what the resolution says as opposed to what you might have wanted it to say. So the second one, it says, the mandatory requirements dictate that bidders who do not submit firearm licenses as part of their bid would be disqualified, so it's disadvantaging those who don't have firearm licenses. Is this an irregularity?
It was identified as irregularity at this point.
It seems to me it's more of a misalignment than an irregularity, that maybe with hindsight, you would have drawn the specifications differently because with hindsight, you didn't want firearm licenses to be a disqualification factor. But I don't see any irregularity here. Where's the irregularity?
If any evaluation process is outside the confines of the bid specification process, it is an irregularity.
Well, this is not outside the bid specification process. The bid specifications themselves stipulate the requirement for the firearm license.
However, if you look at the rest of that sentence, whereas the mandatory requirements dictate that all bidders who do not submit firearms as part of their bid will be disqualified. So that contradicts what the first part of the statement says. Hence, it was highlighted that in the... I'll stop there, see.
The document, the tender document, that comes out of the bid specification committee, does it not?
It does. Yes.
So that document approved by the bid specification document had a mandatory requirement that firearm licenses were required.
Yes, that contradicted. So the specifications, the entire document had 2 points that were contradictory to one another. The first is that specifications stipulate that some areas do not need armed guards and it must be clear. However, in the mandatory requirements, the same document now dictates that bidders who don't submit firearm licenses must be disqualified. The problem was that there would be bidders who say, I will refer you to clause 3.5, imaginary, of this specification and this document. It says here, not all areas require firearms. So why are you now disqualifying us as a result of the second mandatory requirement?
But that is a mandatory requirement that the bidders are alerted to. In the bid document, it says, mandatory requirement firearm license.
Yes, it's part and parcel of that. Within the specifications, the requirement of firearms within this mandatory was also a requirement. That firstly, you don't need to have all, and then secondly, there's another requirement that says you must have, all firearms must be there. So this was contradictory.
And is that not something that should have been that it was capable of being clarified at those meetings where you, I forget what they called, but you know, where you call all of the bidders in to get an explanation? The briefing, the tender briefing.
I'm not certain. I don't sit in those
If you are a
meetings.
bidder and you are confused, do I need a firearm license? Do I not need a firearm license? Is it not incumbent on you to raise that at the briefing meeting, the compulsory briefing meeting that you must attend?
In some instances, yes, some bidders raise that. However, in some instances after the fact, when a bidder has not been awarded and has been disqualified for this reason, it might be an issue for the city.
Why would it be an issue for the city? The bid specification document has a section where it says mandatory requirements. And in those mandatory requirements, it says firearm licenses required. If you're a bidder and you look at the document, you look at what the mandatory requirements are. Even if the mandatory requirements don't make sense, you know that if you don't meet those requirements, you're going to be disqualified. Is that not correct?
That's correct. However, I would like to add, please, SC. The reason why I'm adding is that if the document on its own is contradictory, if a bidder is unsuccessful, and these were amongst the reasons that were outlaid as part of their disqualification, unhappy bidders, unfortunately, are highly litigious. We've seen in the past that this exact same tender was taken to court, irregularities were identified, it was, I think, cancelled from that point. From a high court perspective, I'm not sure of the details, but I'm aware of a situation of this nature. So in this instance, we had to make sure that all issues of concerns and all gaps have been covered accordingly. So this was a major contradictory, which could have opened up the city to litigations. It is a highly litigated tender. We've seen in the past the interest that it goes along with this. Hence, the contradictory could have been an issue that's problematic, particularly for bidders who are not awarded and were disqualified for this reason. They would want to take the city on.
Mr. Mnisi, which document was contradictory?
The tender document
You say
itself.
if the document is contradictory, which document is contradictory?
It was the actual tender document.
The invitation to tender.
The invitation to tender, the specifications within the evaluation criteria, the actual tender documents.
So the specification that, that says some areas do not require armed guards, you're saying that was in the published tender?
Yes.
Yes, but why is it contradictory that you've got that which says some areas don't require that, and yet the client says we require everybody to have a firearm as a mandatory requirement, even though some sections or some sites they have determined would not require firearms? Why is that a contradiction?
The contradiction came in the form within those discussions that you now need to be clear which of those sites wouldn't require firearms. This is taken into account that you might need 100 firearms. Some companies might have 50 firearms. If that distinction is not there, it could be an area of concern. So the distinction in terms of the mandatory requirement, there needed to be a split. In terms of the areas which would require firearms and the areas which would not require firearms. Then it will be easy for the bid evaluation committee to look at a bidder's submission and say, you have submitted a document with 100 firearm licenses. You, however, have submitted a bid with 50 firearm licenses. Yes, you've got firearm licenses, but it's not sufficient. That distinction needed to be there.
No, I'm still at the contradiction. If the advertised tender informs bidders what is required, yes, it has a line somewhere which says not all areas will require armed guards, but the bid document, that same document is very clear to all bidders, everybody who bids, that everyone who submits a bid must submit firearm licenses. What is the problem? I don't understand the problem that you're raising about that, because bidders, as a rule of fairness, fair procurement, bidders must be informed what is required of them. That bid document does inform them that you must submit firearm licenses. I don't see why you have a problem with the fact that elsewhere that document has said something to the effect that some areas won't require armed guards. I don't understand that, and that becomes a reason, another reason to cancel this tender.
Well, Commissioner, I think these were discussions that were held at BAC. I did not take these decisions on my own. Presentations were made, it was assessed, it was accepted that this could be a contradiction that would affect the evaluation of this bid.
A committee necessarily by definition means you're not the only one there. You are with other people. You happen to be the chairperson of this committee. You are the witness in the box right now, and you must justify as part of that committee. You must explain in a way that we understand. The issue is your committee that you chaired provided a reason, another reason for cancelling this tender. And I guess maybe to put it positively is I don't see and I don't agree that that was a valid reason to offer as one of the reasons to cancel the tender, because the bid document has informed bidders what is required of them, and that's the basis on which we evaluate a bid as the BAC. So I guess what I'm saying, what I'm putting to you is I don't accept the reason that you are offering why that bid was cancelled, at least this one reason. I don't know if you have any comment that.
Yes, please, Commissioner. At this point in time, I was convinced that this is a valid reason, that the contradiction would lead to potential litigation and open the city up to litigations. I was further convinced that it would be an additional matter to accept and to highlight as part and parcel of the myriad of other irregularities that were identified at this point in time.
Thanks.
But let me take it further. This is for ad hoc security services, is it not? You're going to appoint a panel, and then you can call on them to perform security services as and when needed at various properties of the city.
As far as I'm concerned, this is for watchman services.
It's an ad hoc security service.
My answer is, as far as I'm concerned, this is watchman services. TMPD chooses whether they would like to use this for ad hoc security services or advertise another tender for ad hoc security services. But the content of this tender was for watchman services and replacing the existing tender that was there, not specifically for ad hoc. It was to guard all 30 sites, all 30 sites.
So what happens then to the ad hoc needs that are that are no longer going to be capable of being addressed in the 2016-2017 tender, under the 2016-17 tender, because that tender will have run its course?
Ideally speaking, if those ad hoc areas, okay, firstly, SC, risk assessments are done by TMPD and the relevant user department, which identifies the need to add an additional site for security-related services. So at this point in time, risk assessments have been concluded. All sites that are deemed important have been included on this. If there were ad hoc sites from the previous tender, I would presume that within this tender, that assessment, if it's still valid, they've been included on this now, so that you stop a process of saying, we'll now add this later on. They should have been included on this. This will be to guard all city sites. And if in the near future, if this tender was successful, another site which wasn't included as part of this bid is identified, TMPD and the relevant user department have discretion to conduct their own risk assessment and decide whether it is a valid point to have another ad hoc service on that point. But for this tender, all key and essential sites would have been taken into account.
Even so, why is it an irregularity to say some of our sites are going to need armed guards, some are not? We want a security company to be able to service all of our sites depending on where we place them.
I see, my answer is that at the time when the report was being considered, this was a valid contradiction from mine and the BAC's perspective. And this was a valid flaw that needed to be highlighted as part and parcel of the myriad of other matters that had already been raised.
Well, I want to put it to you that this is not a material irregularity at all. Certainly not one that in its own right would justify cancellation of a tender. What's your response to that?
I respectfully disagree with you, SC, on the basis that when we looked at this, it was a valid contradiction. The presentations, I might not recall verbatim what the outcomes of the discussions were and what the main reason was that led us to isolating this as an additional issue. But it was of high concern, and that contradiction was raised at that point in time as a key issue that must be highlighted, which might not have received the necessary highlights from the probity team. And this, just to add, it was an additional matter. There were more than 12 other findings that had already been raised by the probity team. Amongst those, there were essential matters that couldn't be cured. So this is now raising every single issue that's there. This is another issue. We have to raise this thing accordingly. This is why I'm saying that some instances were also taken to court for cancelling tenders. So we need to ensure that we have covered all angles and all loopholes that have been identified. So you throw in every single additional issue that you think is a reason that's valid to justify this cancellation.
You keep on speaking about additional reasons, but if one looks at the resolution, which is the decision of the committee, these are the only reasons given.
I did respond to that matter, that the probity report has already, BAC has already discussed all findings that were there. As standard, we don't regurgitate and repeat all those findings again onto this report. The BAC report is just a summary of the discussions that were raised. The attachments, which include the detailed BEC report as well as the actual probity report, are part and parcel of the entire pack. So this doesn't mean they're disregarded. So I'm explaining it in that way, that these are additional matters. It might not be clear in terms of the writing that's there, but the context and sequence of events were raising additional matters that were not raised in the probity report.
You talked about being taken to court on other cases in relation to cancellations. You must then know that when you get taken to court for an administrative act of cancelling a tender, your decision stands or falls by the reasons that are given for it. And if we look at these reasons, the only reasons that are given for it are these 3 bullet points.
These are not the only reasons. These are additional reasons. They are reasons. I'm just trying to put a point.
Sorry, Mr. Mnisi, look at the document. This records the decision of the committee. where do you see any other reasons reflected in the document that records the decision of the committee?
SC, I respectfully disagree on that conclusion. I'm trying to explain how BAC operates and how we do.
Don't disagree, just answer my question. Where in the document do you see any reference to reasons other than the 3 bullet points?
With all due respect, SC, I will refer you to the probity report, which is an
It's
attachment.
not in the document. Refer me to the decision of the committee. Where in the decision of the committee do you see a reference to any other reasons?
SC, my answer to that is the reasons to that are not there. I can't refer you to a page. With respect, may I please
Thank you. That's all I
qualify?
needed. We've had the speeches already. That's all I needed. So nowhere in the document that records the decision of the committee is there a reference to any other reason other than these 3.
SC, my answer to that is yes. May I please have permission to expand?
You don't need permission from me. I wouldn't be inclined to give it, but it's the Commissioner's choice.
Mr. Mnisi, I will allow you to explain, but you make a habit of giving explanations for all the responses or answers that you give, even to questions that do not require explanations. With regard to this one, much earlier, you mentioned that there are additional reasons, meaning reasons that are additional to the reasons that are actually reflected here. Now, Mr. Shaskalson is asking you a simple question as to whether there are reasons that are additional to the reasons that we see here. Yeah, I just find the need for an explanation in this context not understandable, but I've said I will allow you to explain. Do you want Mr. Shaskalson to repeat the question, or can you go ahead and give the explanation you want to give?
Can I please go ahead, Chair?
Yes, but please, Mr. Mnisi, bear in mind what I've said at the beginning of this comment, which is that try to avoid giving explanations even where they are not necessary. And quite a number of times, explanations have not been necessary at all. Don't understand this to be a gag on you and on the testimony you want to give, but we have limited time. So please do not explain what does not need to be explained. But go ahead with this explanation.
Chairperson, first let me profusely apologize to you. I in no way or fashion intend on wasting the Commission's time at all. And I want to emphatically apologize on that. The reason for explaining is when the conclusion from the senior counsel disregards the explanation that I had given. So for the record, I would have just requested that permission to clarify that yes, he is disagreeing with that. I can't falter him on that, but I need to explain the business of the day.
Please go ahead and explain.
Thank you, Chair. And in this instance, I agree with the senior counsel that on the resolution, it's not there, I've agreed. My explanation further was that may we please, senior counsel, consider that with the probity report and an explanation that I've given. For the record, so it's clear that yes, this is how we're resolving, however, that's how BAC operates, and that's how we do the business of council. And I thought it's very clear, it's very wise for me to also bring that for the Commission to understand.
Do you mean this is, when you say this is how you conduct the business of the BAC, do you mean when the BAC makes resolutions, it does not include in those resolutions some of the reasons that informed the resolution? So it states some, but deliberately leaves out some, or others rather. Is that what you mean by when you say this is how you conduct the business of the BAC?
Chairperson, yes. They raise additional matters that were not raised in the probity, but the probity report is an attachment. So you don't disregard them. We just don't repeat them.
Yes, Mr. Shaskalson.
Let's look at your third additional reason. The specifications were silent on the CRF pricing guidelines that should be considered. So what does this mean?
So what this means is that CIRA is regulated and they give pricing. So the document in its own was not clear whether that would be taken into account. Again, this was one of the additional reasons that were just brought on board, and that's what it meant.
Why is that a material irregularity?
Because this is a regulated area from a pricing perspective, so we need to be clear that we're not going to follow those potential pricing that are regulated by CIRA.
Sorry, you're not going to follow potential pricing that's regulated by CIRA?
The specifications were silent on the CIRA pricing guidelines that should be considered. The document in itself and the specifications did not have a clear indication on what happens on the regulations of CIRA and the prices that are there.
So what? I mean, why is that irregular? You're going to assess these bidders on price and BEE after you've excluded people who don't qualify. So you will see what the best price is and you will award to the best price. Why do you have to refer to CIRA guidelines?
Because an additional issue that was raised over and above the myriad of issues that were there, hence at that point in time, it was deemed valid that when the new specifications are presented, and the reason why we bring them on board is that when the new specifications are being compiled, because this tender is being cancelled now, they need to ensure that all potential loopholes would have been covered, including these. So at that point in time, this was an additional reason that was identified.
I can understand half of that. If you're thinking ahead and you're thinking to how you want to rewrite specifications in a new bid that will come out after this one is cancelled, I can understand you may want to refer to CIRA guidelines. So that I can understand. What I can't understand is why you regard the failure to refer to CIRA guidelines as an irregularity that justifies cancellation of this bid.
Thanks, SC. During these discussions, these were additional issues that were identified. And there was a consensus and agreement amongst members of BAC, chaired by myself, that this should be highlighted as an additional matter that must be improved upon and would lead to the material irregularities and cancellation.
Sorry, but why is it, I mean, we've heard that answer several times now, but you haven't addressed my question, which is, why is it a material irregularity? What is irregular about it?
It's a loophole in the specifications.
What is the loophole in the specifications that renders this irregular?
CIRA has got strict guidelines on how much you need to pay per guard. If the document of the city is saying, regardless of the strict guidelines that we have, we will accept our own prices on this matter. Though that was silent on the city's specification document, and all this is saying is that what should have been clearly indicate, because these are specialists of CIRA, they are aware of how the industry operates, to avoid a situation where we award a bidder, then comes award date, he then tells us, CIRA says, you need to pay me this amount of money, these are the regulations. So it was a form of binding bidders to whatever price that they'll bring on board to the city. Because in most instances, I would suspect that there will be, the reason the city didn't have or go with CIRA rates is that we wanted to get cheaper prices, wanted to get a competitive bid. So that was there to safeguard the city in the instance of that as well. That we need to be clear that when it's time for anniversary, bidders don't take us on in terms of guidelines of CIRA. So this would have binded them from the beginning that you are aware, your price is absolute, don't tell us about CIRA now.
So now, if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is that the bid is going to have prices in them. CIRA has guidelines that may be higher than the bid prices. And you were worried that come renegotiation time or come escalation time, people would want to escalate up to the CIRA maximum. Is that what the concern was?
That's the concern.
Well, first of all, I want to put to you that that is not an irregularity, a material irregularity in the bid. It's not an irregularity. At best, it's a specification that you should have drawn differently. You've changed your mind on the specifications. What's your response to that? As
the legal experts, I'll take your assertion on this matter, and I agree with that. But when we looked at it at BAC, it was a necessary additional matter to bring on board as a shortcoming which would lead to that.
But you'll accept it's not an irregularity that would have justified cancelling the tender as an irregularity.
I can't accept that, Chair, because pricing is
Let me
key.
put the proposal to you this way. Assume you award the tender and there is a losing bidder who is dissatisfied with your decision. And that losing bidder goes to court and says, I want to have this tender reviewed and set aside because it doesn't, it is silent on zero pricing guidelines. Would that losing bidder succeed?
If the city's tender was silent, well, I don't know what would have happened in the proceedings, but there could be something that might be considered.
Why would it go to the regularity of the bid that there was nothing said about zero pricing guidelines in relation to the specifications in this document? Why is that an issue of regularity?
I see, with your permission, on this same document, can I request that we go to page 38? It's going to be, it might be able to answer this question that we're raising here. Page 38, GM4.
Sorry, page 38?
Page 38 of this bundle that we're looking at, my bundle with my annexures. Page 38 of this pack that we're currently on now. Thank you, Chair. So on page 38, what I would like to bring to the attention of the Commission is resolution number 4. Well, it was not resolved, but this was a request from the department. The circumstances around this was that the department was coming to BAC. This tender had closed. They were coming to BAC saying, we want to extend this bid because the previous tender had not closed. Recommendation number 4 states that they also want an approval to be granted for any envisaged price escalation subject to verifiable annual cost calculation in line with the Private Security Industry Regulation Authority (CIRA) rates that may result from the period of appointment. So we had seen instances of this nature when dealing with this tender. Raising that as an additional area of concern was to cover inconsistencies of this nature, so that it's clear from the onset that when you apply within the city of Tshwane, you apply at your rate that you are given. You will not be giving any further motivations on CIRA escalations at any point in time.
Well, but that's clear from the tender document. If they don't give you a right to escalate in accordance with CIRA in the document, then your bid is your bid. And in this case, there was no reference to CIRA guidelines.
Yes. So that was the flaw that was identified, SC, that we need to be clear, we need to be certain, because even in the previous tender, there was no guidance provided in terms of what will happen on CIRA rates.
Yes, there was no guidance, and so people asked for special dispensation to escalate by CIRA, and you said no.
So in some instances, they take us to court. When we say no, they take us to court, and I'm aware, as we speak now, there are litigations on this matter.
But Mr. Mnisi, that last reason, the requirement that its specifications is silent on the CIRA pricing guidelines, I think using it as a ground for cancellation, in fact, would have entitled any bidder to take you to court. That was not one of your requirements. That's not one of the prescribed tender stipulations, and it cannot, therefore, be a valid reason to cancel. I think it's simply that.
Okay.
That your BAC, in its, you're being inventive and thinking we should have had this in the first place, we should have it in the future, doesn't have any consequence for this bid, for the validity or regularity of this bid. In fact, you are open to being challenged. I think the city is very lucky that no bidder took you to court on this ground, that there was no such requirement in the tender, therefore you can't cancel on this ground. I'm putting that to you as I want to say as a correct position of law. That's not a valid reason to have cancelled this tender.
Okay.
Thank you.
Again, you are nodding, Mr. Mnisi. Are you agreeing with the proposition by Commissioner Baloyi?
I'm agreeing. She's
Thank
a
you.
specialist in law. I can't. I'm
you.
agreeing.
Thank you.
You see, Mr. Mnisi, what I want to put to you is that if we look at these 3 bullet points, none of them justify a decision to cancel. You've accepted that in the first one, it would have been possible to, well, not it would have been possible, the BAC accepted that Probity's interpretation was right and it was possible to go back and apply Probity's interpretation. You've accepted in the third one it wasn't a ground for cancellation, and there seems to be some debate in relation to the second one, but I want to put to you that the second one in its own right is not a basis for cancellation. So we have a situation where each of the 3 reasons stated by the BAC, and the only 3 reasons stated by the BAC for cancellation, are bad reasons. What's your response to that?
I don't agree to that. These were not the only reasons that were stated by BAC. We considered
Sorry,
the
let me
Probity
stop you there.
Report.
Where did BAC state any reasons other than these? Where in the document do you see a stated reason other than these?
Commissioner, I have to expand on this, but I'm
Answer
also
the
very
question
mindful-
first. If the answer to the question is nowhere in the document, say that, and then we can move on.
The answer to that question is yes. These are the 3 reasons that are mentioned. In me expanding, it's not the only reasons.
No. The question is, where in the document do you see any other reasons?
These are the 3 reasons that have been allocated in the BAC report, SC.
So there are no other reasons in the document?
Yes,
Mr.
yes,
Mnisi?
Commissioner, that's what I'm
Thank you.
saying.
Thank you.
That takes me to what was going on in relation to TMPD3 outside the official channels. And if we go back to our timeline, we see that the first meeting of the BEC was 24 March. We've been there before. That's recorded in the Probity Report at paragraph 54.3. The day after the first meeting, if we go to page 158 of file 3,
What page is that, SC?
158.
Bundle 3.
Yes, bundle 3. You'll see that on the 25th of March, Sergeant Nkosi sent you that document that you describe as a draft report of the BEC on this tender.
Yes.
It was a big day, the 25th of March. Sergeant Nkosi, you and the General were going to meet together. Sergeant Nkosi sent you this document. He then later sent you the document with the mandate that Victor had from NICO, and he also sent you his list of 7 bidders in priority for the land tender, all on the same day. You recall that?
I can see that.
Let's get back to this document. Is there any legitimate basis on which Sergeant Nkosi should have access to this document?
This is a TMPD, no. Permission to expand?
Go ahead.
I'll be very quick. The TMPD report for 03 draft admin report, it makes reference to the closing register items. So on this, when I evaluated this document, there was nothing sensitive that had been done. But my answer is yes. There was no need for him to get this. He could have just got the closing register, which would have been published. It was there on the website. That would have been the best document to get.
Yes, but he didn't get that document. He got this document, which was a draft prepared by someone inside the BEC process.
I can't confirm that. I don't know where he got this document.
Well, it was a draft prepared by someone inside the BEC process, was the proposition I was putting to you. A draft administrative report on TMPD3 could only emerge from someone inside the BEC process. Is that not correct?
It's a proposition, SC, so I'm not going to disagree with you, but I don't know where this could have
Who
came from.
else would be preparing draft administrative reports in relation to TMPD3?
SC, I don't know. I can't give an answer to that
The
right now.
only body that could produce draft administrative reports in relation to TMPD3 at this stage was the BEC, surely.
Okay.
Does the okay mean I agree?
Commissioner, I don't agree. My answer is I don't know, but I'm accepting the proposition that the senior counsel is bringing on board. I just don't want to speculate.
Which other body could have produced this report other than the BEC? Which other body? Certainly could not have been the BAC.
No, it's not the BAC.
So which other body other than the BEC?
I don't have the full report. I can't see the contents of it. So it's very difficult for me to give a conclusive answer and bind someone at this stage.
Can I ask you to look at page 175 where we get past the list?
Yes.
(2.1) Late bids received, if applicable. No late bids received. 3, pre-compliance. The following 435 bidders were evaluated on pre-compliance. So some evaluation has already taken place. Who does the evaluation on pre-compliance?
It's blank. This means no evaluation has taken place.
It says, well, it is blank at this stage, but it says the following 435 bidders were evaluated on pre-compliance.
So it's a shell. That's what they would have needed to complete once evaluation commences. If it's blank, it means the process had not started.
And it's a shell for whom?
Like I said, I don't know for whom, but I'm accepting the proposition that it could be from BEC.
The proposition wasn't that it was could be.
Ordinarily, Mr. Mnisi, who within Tswane would use this blank? Ordinarily. And please don't be cagey. Ordinarily, who would use this blank?
This blank would be used by members of BEC.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Shaskell.
Anybody else?
It's incomplete. I don't know. I can't say. But it looks like it could be used by that SC. Anybody else, I don't know.
Well, it's not entirely incomplete because if we see the list contains 435 bidders and pre-compliance, the item 3 refers to 435 bidders. So someone has taken a template and done some change to it in relation to this bid. You see that?
They've loaded the closing register, the contents of the closing register.
Yes, they've loaded the contents of the closing register and they put it onto a template, which I am assuming is a template used by the BEC.
Yes.
Right. So let's get back to lock and key. Despite lock and key, a document, a template that is used by the BEC has made its way to Sergeant and Corsi. Should that be possible?
And these are the reasons. It shouldn't be possible. The answer is no. But these are the reasons why this tender was cancelled.
This is not the reason why this tender was cancelled. Nowhere in any of the reports does it say Sergeant and Corsi received a template from the BEC, the process was compromised.
I was saying that the test of safety and ensuring that documents were safeguarded was one of the reasons why this tender was cancelled. Not specifically that Sergeant Corsi, but the test for documents being kept safely was one of the reasons that were identified.
That's the 25th of March. You now know that a template used by the BEC in relation to this tender has been sent to Sergeant and Corsi. That's going to taint the process of this tender, is it not?
No.
So then it's not a reason why the tender was cancelled.
The documents that were lost was the reason. We just agreed, SC, that this was not the reason that Sergeant Corsi received it. We agreed on that.
Yes, it should have been, but it wasn't.
Yes.
But you knew from the 25th of March that this was happening and that this, objectively viewed, would taint the regularity of this tender.
I had received this. From my evaluation of the document, it contained information of the closing register, which was published. There was no additional sensitive information that was brought on board through evaluating, assessing this document that I had received.
But you knew that the obvious inference to draw from the fact that Sergeant Nkosi sent you this document is that he had someone inside the BEC who was giving him documents.
I didn't know. I don't know where that comes from. So I did not know where he received this.
The obvious inference to be drawn from this was that Sergeant Nkosi had someone inside the BEC who was giving him documents. Is that, do you take issue with that?
I do take. That's not true.
Well, what other inference could you draw?
The truth of where he received this. And the truth of...
From what other source could Sergeant Nkosi possibly have received this document? Bear in mind that you have said, ordinarily, this is a document used by the BEC. So other than the BEC, what would his source have been, ordinarily, other than the BEC?
Yes, Commissioner. That information is known. He received this from the General. He did not receive it from anyone in the BEC.
And where
It
would
was
the General
attached.
have
The
received
General
it?
was, was he not a member of the BEC?
No, he was not a member of the BEC.
Well, where would the General have received it?
I don't know where he would have received, but he would have received it internally. He would have received it somewhere internally.
Presumably from someone inside the BEC.
Presumably, yes.
Yes.
But
So Sergeant Nkosi had an indirect route into the BEC through the General. You didn't know it at the time, but directly or indirectly, Sergeant Nkosi must have had a route to the BEC to get into the BEC to get this document.
Well, I'm not sure, and I can't comment on that. I've got no comment on that.
Mr. Mnisi, was this a publicly available document?
The document in its form, no.
Yes. So he didn't get it properly. It wasn't shared with him in a permissible way, in a regular way. Surely you must accept that. We
I've
shouldn't
accepted
spend
that,
another
Commissioner, and I've
3
agreed
minutes
to
on
that.
it. Yes,
So
that's
the-
a simple proposition that's been
Yes.
made to you, that
Yes.
Sergeant Nkosi had possession to a tender-related document that he should not have had. That's a simple proposition that's being made. You must accept that.
Commissioner, I've accepted that.
Okay,
But if you had
thank you.
listened to the discussions, the inference was that Sergeant Nkosi received it from BEC directly. So,
I'm reformulating. Sergeant
Okay.
Nkosi had access to a tender-related document that should not have been in his possession. You accept that?
I have accepted that.
And that suggests, or at least on the face of it, is a corruption already of the tender process. It is being muddied. Do you accept that? That
No.
a tender document that is internal of an incomplete tender assessment process is sitting with a member of the public, because that's what he is. It's sitting with a member of a public. That is problematic for that tender process. No?
Commissioner, I don't accept that, with all due respect.
Okay,
The contents
explain.
of this report that's here does not contain any sensitive information
No, it
whatsoever.
doesn't matter. No, from my question, it doesn't matter whether it contains sensitive information or not. It's a tender document or tender-related document. As a matter of policy, it should not be outside
I've agreed to that,
of
yes.
the municipality. That it is outside of the municipality with a member of the public in itself is an irregularity. You must be able to accept
I've
that.
agreed to that.
Thank you. That's all I'm checking with you. Thank you.
But you didn't take any steps upon being made aware of this irregularity, did you?
Indeed, again, I assessed the content of the document. The document, from my perspective, did not need me to take any further steps. This was information that was already available to the public upon my receiving of this document. Did not contain anything sensitive or confidential. There was nothing for me to raise.
But there was something for you to raise. It was that a document internal to the city relating to this tender process had made its way to Sergeant Nkosi.
From my perspective, all I'll need to do is safeguard the procurement process, as I previously stated. In this instance, I assessed the document that was received. It did not contain any sensitive information in terms of the evaluation process in its entirety. Hence, I felt there's no need for me to escalate this any further. I don't have any conclusive evidence on any leak at this stage in time. But I do agree, this is a leaked draft administrative report. It doesn't contain anything sensitive or confidential. I had nothing to report.
Did the probity report pick up that this document had made its way to Sergeant Nkosi?
I'm not certain if those are one of the reasons that were provided.
Well, if we go to the document, I think you'll accept that it didn't.
It did not specifically say Sergeant Nkosi received this, no.
It didn't specifically speak of leaking of any documents to members of the public, did it?
Nope.
So the probity report was unable to pick up the leak of members of the of this document to members of the public.
No, it was unable to. It didn't focus on that.
So the probity report didn't have mechanisms that enabled it to identify potential leaks of information.
This was a closing register, firstly. There's no sensitive information that's contained in this. And as far as I'm concerned, there are sufficient processes that are designed by the probity teams to test any potential leaks within the system.
But they didn't pick up this one.
As far as I'm concerned, the process and systems are there.
At this point, Mr. Chaskalson, I think we should take the adjournment. Let's squeeze in. Let's adjourn and